This is the Sales Babble Podcast, episode 524, How to Know When It's Time to Pitch.
Welcome to Sales Babble, the podcast that shares selling secrets for non-sellers. And now your host, Pat Helmers.
The other day I was at a meetup, and it's one of those places where a lot of the local business people get together. There's insurance people, financial services people, accountants, things like that, and you shake hands and exchange cards, and invariably this happens every few months when I bump into somebody, and you have these pleasantries, and you exchange, hello, what do you do, and I said something along the lines like, I had some issues with my insurance policy because of some damage to my house. And the person immediately hopped on that and started pitching me on their insurance company. Didn't give me a chance at all to speak. Just started talking. And even though I'm kind of looking at my watch and there's some other people I wanted to talk to, I was just a bit too nice just to up and walk away. This person, it was a guy, did not qualify me in the very least to see whether or not I was interested in anything like that at all, and just put all this time and energy into me when they could have been someplace else talking to somebody else who may actually have been unhappy with their insurance policy. We're starting a business where they needed a business insurance policy. I don't mean to tell the guy what to do, but it was definitely sucking up my time, and it was pretty painful. This is not the first time I've had salespeople do this to me. No, not at all. So, what I'd like to talk about today is to kind of explain why you shouldn't be doing that. And Lao Tzu actually has something to talk about this. It talks about the faults that we make and the recognition of those faults and how to fix those. So, how to know when it's time to pitch? Well, that's the topic for today. Well, before we get to it, make sure and subscribe to the podcast. I don't want you to miss an episode. We come out every week. Come out on Tuesdays. It'll give you a little ping so you'll know that it's time to give it a listen. Make sure and do that. And so, with no further ado, let's pitch. And now for today's chapter. To understand, we label buyers by what we see. But labels have limits, only describing the obvious, ignoring the subtle. When you see beyond the label, you see the true nature of the buyer. Accept them for who they are and help them for where they're at. Look beyond the obvious. Wake up to the true nature of the buyer and speak to it. And now today's story. On the sales call, Chris quickly built rapport with Lee, the prospect. Next, Chris asked about their business challenges. Lee explained how they have 3 big issues, and then explained the last few months' quality issues. Immediately, Chris jumped on the quality problems and started explaining how the company had a new program that eliminates defects. Chris pressed Lee into a demonstration on defect elimination. Reluctantly, Lee agreed. And at the end of the call, Chris tried to close the deal, but Lee was hesitant to take the next step. The call ended with no action taken. Afterward, Pat and Chris huddled to discuss the deal. What could I have done to close Lee? Asked Chris. Listen to the recordings. Did I mess up the demo? Pat listened, and before the demo started, Pat stopped the recording and said, Lee mentioned they had 3 issues. But you never got to all three. Instead, you focused on the first issue, the quality difficulties. Why? Chris responded, "Well, I knew we had a solution for that." Pat went on, "What you did was put Lee in a little box and labeled it quality. Who knows what their other pressing issues are? We can only guess. Quality troubles may not be at the top of their list. But what you did isn't uncommon. Sellers often pounce on the first problem they hear. But there could be others, more important problems. Slow down the sale. Take your time. Let the buyer place all their problems on the table. Then speak." Too often, sellers get impatient. They ask a question and start asking when they hear an answer that their product could solve. Next, they pitch without fully understanding if the prospect is a truly qualified buyer. When I experience this, I have to stop them, sometimes raising my voice saying, "Stop, stop, stop. I'm not a qualified buyer. You don't need to pitch me. I'm not qualified." Then they wake up. Lao Tzu wrote, "To know that you do not know is best. To pretend to know when you do not know is a disease. Only when one recognizes the fault as a fault can one be without fault." Folks, don't interrupt. Questions are to sales as breath is to life. Listen. Slow down. Now, to download a copy of this week's chapter of the Tao Sales Babble, you can find it in the show notes at salesbabble.com. And while you're there, please sign up for our newsletter. It comes out like once a week. It's very brief. It actually gives you a little clip about what we're talking about today. It gives you, the whole idea is to kind of get you excited about hearing the whole podcast. It's not going to take up much of your time. In fact, you're going to enjoy it. Again, it's just a very convenient way to keep up on the podcast. Now, if you could do me a favor, if you really enjoyed this podcast, you thought it was valuable, if you could share this with a colleague or a friend who's looking to grow their selling skills, I'd really appreciate it, because word of mouth is the best way to grow a podcast. It's also the best way to get leads in the selling business. And you should be getting comfortable asking for leads. Anybody you know I might be able to help? Somebody like you? Loyal, happy customer? Is there anybody else? Any friends you got who might appreciate some of the things that we're doing here? Why don't you share them with me? You know, people are surprisingly nice if you just asked. Anyway. Now, if you got any questions about selling, about this episode or any other episode that we've had in the past, please reach out. You can find me on LinkedIn, or you can click on the Babble Me link on salesbabble.com. That'll send a message directly to me, and I'd love to chat. I'd love to help you. Yeah. With that said, I think that's all we've got for this week. Until next week, take care and have a highly successful and a profitable selling day.
Thank you for listening to the Sales Babble podcast. Find us at www.salesbabble.com.
This is a production of Habanero Media.